Well, greetings to my fellow apologists. I'm going to do a very low-tech presentation today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the concept of worldview and how it affects us as Christian apologists. Um, have you ever wondered, as you listen to the news or as you hear the radio or the latest movie or whatever, that, what exactly informs the um, dominant secularist worldview? And why is it so different from the Christian view of things? Sometimes, if you can read this, sometimes it seems as if half the world is crazy. Um, so I want to, humans are interesting. So talking about the concept of worldview a little bit. A worldview is basically that which a story, if you will. We think of ourselves as rational creatures, human beings do, and at the end of the day, um, facts by themselves really don't mean much. We all put facts and life experiences, etc., into the context of a story. A story about what life is about, why are we here, what are we aiming towards, what's the ultimate goal from a human perspective. And that's not something that just Christians do. That's something that we all do as human beings. It's how we make sense of things. So a worldview, if you will, is a story or a narrative that answers the question, what is life all about? So we'll talk a little bit about that. It's very, very important to remember that the worldview that we have is a narrative or a story, and it colors everything we see. So we're going to talk in a moment about secularist worldview, but important to remember with my high-tech materials here, worldview is something that colors everything we see. So today, here's what we're going to talk about. The point of the talk is every Christian apologist can be more impactful in their calling by understanding the core assumptions of the dominant secularist worldview. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. So we've got a story here. We've got a secularist worldview. We've got Christian worldview. I think the Christian story is fairly well understood by us as apologists. But what is it that makes secularists, secular humanists, secular atheists, those who dominate the culture right now, particularly in film and academia and books and online, etc. What is it makes them tick? Well, their first worldview assumption that fits into their narrative of what this is all about is this idea that we're super smart now. We've sort of bitten the apple, if you will, pardon the pun, since I'm recording on an Apple computer. But basically this idea that science has made the very idea of God, obsolete. Because in the past, people believed in gods. People had this deep down need to be able to explain what happens in the world, earthquakes and wars and those types of things, as something that the gods caused. But now that we're smarter, we know science proves that there is no God. We have no need for that. We've moved beyond that, and that's just a core secularist assumption. So in the absence of God, what do we have? Well, let's look at secularist assumption number 2, if we will, which is this idea that man is the measure of all things. Without God, then it's up to us to set our ideas of right and wrong. And so what we found after exploring this for some time is that we really can't do that. I mean, there's no common basis. I think Nietzsche got it right ultimately, that without God, there's just an abyss from a moral perspective. But being who we are, we've got to fill the gap with something. And so we've come up with this idea that it's up to each individual to be able to decide what it is, what truth is for themselves. And that's a second secularist assumption that we don't necessarily share as Christians. although there's plenty of room for individual preferences, some things are not, not a preference. To give an example, I don't know, child pornography. I don't care where you are. I don't care what culture you're in. I don't care what time it is. That's wrong. You don't abuse children. And, I think C.S. Lewis would show in his Tao, which is a listing of all the core values across cultures, that's not just something that we've decided independently, but there's something there in our very nature, and we believe as Christians, obviously, that was given to us by God. So the third that I'm going to share with you in this brief video, third secularist assumption, is this idea, ultimately the end of all of our strivings, the end of everything we do as secularists, is this idea that we're all headed towards utopia, that utopia is ultimately the goal, right? So if a worldview is like a story or a narrative, the stories or narratives have, protagonists, antagonists. You've got, you're going to have a goal or an end to which the story is moving, and then you've got barriers that are in the way. Well, from a secular standpoint, the idea of progressivism is that you're moving towards this utopia, and we can obviously see how we share that with with other with secularists being Christians ourselves. So I'll leave you as we finish up here. I'll leave you with this real quick quote I found interesting. So Sun Tzu, those of you may know, military strategic guy, military tactician, general, philosopher from China, said, "If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat." So hopefully, knowing a little bit about the core assumptions of the secularists will allow us to be able to address those, be able to find where we as Christians meet some of those, and where we differ. So hopefully this has been helpful to you, and thanks a lot. I hope to see you guys around.